All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am putting a link to the slide deck into the chat. Excuse me. You do not have to have that pulled up, but you might want to save that link. There's a lot of embedded links that we're going to look at this morning, and you may want to be able to reference those at a later time. So I put the link to those slides into the chat. And of course, I'll be showing them as well. So good morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Donna Murray, the Digital Accessibility Specialist at DPI. I have joined, I think, the past 3 quarterly calls. So you may have heard me give just a brief introduction to the Americans with Disabilities Act rule and some other information related to digital accessibility. Our conversation this morning is going to be specifically around just a kind of an introduction to digital accessibility. We're going to talk about some common digital accessibility errors and how to fix them. And a couple minutes of just a quick reminder about that Americans with Disabilities Act Title II rule that came out in April and how that will impact and it's kind of a lens for our conversation today. We'll talk about how that will impact not only DPI, but our PSUs. So let's jump in. Before we begin, please just stay muted when you're not talking. This is definitely a laid back environment for this presentation. So at any point, please feel free to use the chat or raise your hand, or if you feel comfortable doing so, feel free to unmute and interrupt along the way if you have any questions. There is captioning available. You should have access to it in WebEx, probably in the left-hand corner of your screen. And I will be posting this recording and transcript and, of course, sharing it with our PIOs via email in a couple of days once I have time to clean up the captions and the transcript. So the first thing I'm going to challenge us to do is just rethink our definition of disability. Because if you're like me, the common definition that I think of with disability is through that medical model definition. My daughter, Olivia, is 19 years old, and she has multiple disabilities through that medical model lens. But there's also this definition that, again, I hope is how we frame our conversation today. And that is that a disability is a mismatch between a person and their environment. So for example, I use video captions all the time. I first started using them because my daughter Olivia did not like that external, unpredictable noise. Now I just leave them on. I feel like I can process information better when I have captions on. So I may use video captions if I'm deaf, which would be considered, a permanent disability. But it might be temporary or situational, because remember, I'm challenging us to think about disability as a mismatch between a person and their environment. So if I have an ear infection, or maybe I went to a loud concert last night, then I might have a temporary disability. But there's also times where we have a situational mismatch between ourselves and our environment. So like a busy coffee shop or a quiet space where I don't want to bother anyone, so I have captions on. So similar to this image here on the screen, this curb cut, there are some things that are designed for people with that medical model lens, that medical model definition of disability, like this curb cut. This is absolutely created for someone like my daughter who's in a wheelchair. But so many other people can be helped by this curb cut. So think about, someone with a stroller, or someone who has, a bad knee, or I had someone in one of my in-person sessions for this same content say, people who are looking down at their phone Yes, absolutely. That's definitely a mismatch between a person and their environment, and a curb cut would probably be helpful for that. So there's lots of situations where something like this was, again, designed for someone with that medical model definition of disability, but really could help anyone. So we call this the curb cut effect when something has been universally designed. So while we have a requirement and have had a requirement to ensure that our content is accessible, and now we have this new rule that outlines a specific technical standard that we have to meet, at the end of the day, what we really are doing is focusing on ensuring that our resources and our services are accessible so that everyone can access them no matter what mismatch they might have in that current situation between themselves and their environment. So our conversation today, and as we talk about some accessibility strategies over the next 53 minutes, is really going to be focused on some things that are covered in this POUR framework. And the POUR framework is really designed to kind of give a, a focus for the types of things we need to be doing to make sure our content's accessible. So making sure that we're presenting information in multiple ways. So for example, if we have images, we should have a textual description of those visual images so that that information is presented in multiple ways depending on what the user needs. Another one is operable, so making sure that we're providing options for navigation. So for example, we may have someone who's a keyboard user as opposed to using a trackpad or a mouse. So we need to make sure that they have, that's one of the options for being able to navigate that information. Another thing is this is honestly just good design practice, making sure that the experiences that we're creating are intuitive, that there's, consistency, that we're using plain language. And then the last one is robust. And this is just making sure that we're checking our content for accessibility and that we are ensuring that our content is accessible through the use of assistive technologies. So some of the strategies that we're going to talk about today are what I call accessibility big wins. They're easy to learn. They have the potential to have a huge impact on users with disabilities, and they align with this POUR framework. But honestly, they're things that we could start implementing today. Now, I did include a slide in the deck that that has some links specific to that ADA Title II rule. We're not going to do a deep dive into the rule today. In one of the quarterly meetings, we talked about some of the exceptions that were included in the rule. And I actually have a recorded webinar where I've done a deep dive into the rule. So you can reference that if you'd like to dig deeper into some of those exceptions. But the short of it is that we have this new rule that came out in April that basically gives us some clarity about the Americans with Disabilities Act and our compliance requirements. Because up to this point, up until the rule, there was not a technical standard specifically outlining the things that we need to do in order to meet ADA. Now the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, has now been outlined in the rule as being our technical standard. So as I scroll down on the 2.1 website, you'll notice after kind of the introduction narrative that we get to the standards themselves. Notice how they're chunked. The first section is perceivable, and then we have operable, understandable, and of course, robust. So it follows that POUR framework. And so we're not going to cover all of these today, but I am going to hit those, again, what I call the big wins. So we'll talk about things like making sure we have text descriptions for our images, making sure that we meet the minimum color contrast ratio for our text color versus our background color. So you'll see that those are aligned with, one of the specific standards from WCAG 2.1. So again, we won't cover everything, but we are going to hit some of those big wins. I do have a Google Doc if it's helpful for you today as we are, as I'm showing some strategies. There'll be some strategies that you could actually practice as we go. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, if that's not helpful to you, you certainly do not have to. But I put a link in the chat that will give you access to make a copy of this Google Doc. If you are a Microsoft Word person instead, you can download from the copy of the Google Doc, you can download a Microsoft Word version and use that as your demo document. So basically, I have a document here that has some accessibility issues in it, and we're going to talk about some strategies today on how to fix some of those issues. So if you want to practice as we go, feel free to do so with that Google Doc. So the first few things are really just about some strategies for making sure that our text is formatted to be more accessible, more easily readable. The first thing is just to make sure that that we try to use sans serif fonts simply because of the consistency in the width of the characters as opposed to serif fonts where that width changes. And you'll notice that serif fonts have these feet on the characters. I say that they, have a little bit of sass to them, and the sans serif fonts do not. So generally speaking, sans serif fonts are more easily readable. Another thing to consider is to make sure that our text is not justified because of the differences in spacing that happens. There's inconsistent spacing when our text is justified. So if I instead just do a left alignment, then that spacing is going to be consistent from line to line. So again, more easily readable. Another tip is just to use numbered and bulleted lists. If you notice in the demo document, it looks like I have this bulleted list here, but really all I did was manually put a dash in front of these points here. And what's not happening is that the markup language in the background is not formatting that and labeling it as an unordered list. So if someone were using something like a screen reader, it's not going to announce that they've landed on a list. So instead of just manually trying to format it, use the formatting tools that are available to you in the editor, whatever you're using, the Google Doc or the Word document, or the PowerPoint slide deck. Use the formatting that's available to you in the editing tool because it's going to automatically update that markup language in the background to make sure that this is labeled as a bulleted list. So the last tip I have here for text formatting is simply not to rely on formatting alone. So I'm just going to come in here to the text for a moment and just add to it. I'm just going to put important. Meeting at 9. Instead of just, making this bold and italicizing it and maybe highlighting it to emphasize importance, use the word important with it. So in other words, don't just rely on formatting alone because some speech to text or screen reader tools are not going to announce that that text has been emphasized with bold and highlight and italics. So the point here is be cognizant about not just using formatting to tell a story. If something's important, then let's label it as such. All right, our next strategy is a big one. There's an organization that takes a look at the top 1 million most visited web pages, and does an accessibility evaluation of those web pages, and found that over half of those web pages, those top 1 million most visited websites, over half of them had images that did not include alternative text. And the point here is that if someone cannot visually access this image, they need to have access to a textual description of it. A good litmus test for writing alt text is really just to think about if someone can't visually access this image because I'm holding it in my hand and I'm talking to them on the phone, how would I describe it to them? Really, it's important to recognize that context is everything. So I might write alt text for this image by saying something like a hand holding an ice cream cone. And that might be sufficient. This is actually an image from NC State. If you didn't know, they make their own ice cream. I did not know that until a couple of years ago. So they make Howling Cow ice cream. Is the name of their ice cream place. And this is an image of someone holding an ice cream cone from Howling Cow. So if I'm in my document, my demo document, you'll see I have that same image. In most cases, when you want to add alt text to an image, usually you can just right-click on an image and there should be some option like alt text or image description or even just the picture format screen that you can select. So in this case, in a Google Doc, you can right-click and go to alt text and my image options open up and you'll see here's the place where I can put the alt text. Now, sometimes it's not just screen readers that need access to the alt text. Sometimes, we're on a web page and it doesn't load and the images don't appear. So having that textual description available is one of those, curb cut effects. It can be helpful for everyone. It depends on if you're, what kind of mismatch you have with your environment. So let's take a look at a couple examples of how to write alt text effectively for an image like this. So in this first example, this is just an introduction to Howling Cow ice cream. I'm using that same image. And so my text might read something like this. A person in the Tally Student Union holds a waffle cone filled with cookies and cream ice cream. So again, if this is an introduction to Howling Cow, that might be an appropriate alt text. Now, alt text, of course, has a little bit of subjectivity to it because your alt text may read a little bit differently. I honestly am still working on finding that sweet spot of sharing the important details in my alt text while also being succinct. So sometimes I tend to add probably some extra detail that's not needed. There's not a clear line in the sand. It's just about ensuring, again, that you are telling the story of that visual image in a succinct way that shares all the important information that's needed. Let's talk about what happens when I change the context. So in the next instance, on the next slide, I have the exact same photo, but now if this were an image in a textbook around photography, and maybe I'm talking about f-stop and depth of field, then my alt text might need to be different. And so in this instance, the alt text that I put is close-up photo of a hand holding an ice cream cone. The building in the background is blurred, demonstrating a shallow depth of field. So again, the alt text changed because my context changed. Now that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes the alt text might be similar in different contextual situations. But again, the idea here is that you need to describe that visual through the context of why you're using that visual in the first place. So again, a good litmus test is pretend I'm talking with you over the phone. How would I describe that image to you because you can't visually see it? Now, sometimes I still struggle with the difference between writing a caption instead of alt text. So sometimes I have to think, okay, I'm not sharing a caption in the alt text space. I need to describe the actual visual image. So this is an example. So a caption might be a Harry Potter meme, but that would not be good text for an alt text. Because if someone couldn't access this image of Hermione Granger from Harry Potter looking wide-eyed, and the text reads, when you hear someone say that accessibility isn't important, Harry Potter meme is not going to be a sufficient alt text for that image. I need to know, how Hermione is looking with those wide eyes, and I certainly need to include the text that's on the image so that someone who can't visually access it has all the information they need. A Harry Potter meme does not tell that story. That's really a caption. It goes with the picture, not in place of it. And sometimes there's a need for us to have a long description for our images, especially in the land of academics. We have oftentimes more complex images. Maybe we're sharing a data, like a bar chart or something, or in this instance, the NASA was sharing an image from the Webb telescope. And so they needed a long description, a pretty lengthy alt text to go with it. And sometimes it might be best just to put that long description just somewhere nearby in the text. So if it's on a web page, then you might could just put that somewhere on the web page instead of putting that, that lengthy narrative in the alt text box. And then my alt text could just read something like long description nearby, something like that. So sometimes you have a limited number of characters for your alt text space. So if you do need a long description, sometimes you don't have that option because you only have a limited number of characters. Because, of course, hang on, let me sign back in. Because, of course, most of the time with alt text, we want to be, again, pretty succinct with that. So if you do have a long description, that's absolutely fine. You just might want to put that in the surrounding text instead of in the alt text box. A couple of more strategies about writing effective alt text is that we don't necessarily need to start alt text with image of. So if I had put in my alt text image of someone holding an ice cream cone, a screen reader is going to announce an image when it gets to it. So it would say image, and then it would read the alt text, image of someone holding an ice cream cone. So that would be redundant. Image of someone holding an ice cream cone. So we don't necessarily need to start it with these words. We might want to say something like photograph of or bar chart of, if we're trying to describe the type of image that it is. And then the other important point about images and alt text is that sometimes we just use images to be eye-catching. So for example, if I go to DPI's webpage, you'll notice that in addition to some information in this scrolling bar at the top, that there's images. And for example, that first image and then some of the images down below, these are really just stock images. They're really meant to be just visually appealing, just eye-catching. You could certainly write alt text for them, but honestly, they're not sharing any additional critical information. It's really just kind of an eye-catching stock photo to, again, be visually appealing and draw you to that section of the page. So in those instances, you could literally just put decorative in as the alt text, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. If you're familiar with HTML or the markup language in the background and you have access to it, there is an alt tag that has open and close quotation marks with nothing in between it. And essentially, a screen reader would skip right over the image because there's no alt text, so it must be decorative. So I often see in the land of education and educational communications that we will create some sort of graphic that has a lot of text on it. to be visually appealing, to use, good graphic design. And the difficulty with having images of text is that if we don't have alt text to go with it, or a long description nearby that has all that that has all that text from the image, then people could be missing some critical information. So again, make sure that we're putting the alt text, which would include all the text on this image, or make sure that we have all of that text nearby in a long description and that we reference that in the alt text so that someone's not missing that critical information. Another example is on social media. So honestly, this is the most common issue, I think, or accessibility issue with content in social media, is that we oftentimes we add pictures to social media without adding alt text. And oftentimes we'll create graphics like this example from the U.S. Department of Education. They've got this whole summer reading challenge laid out with icons and numbers and a quick phrase for each day. But if this image did not have alt text with it, then folks are really missing those 10 ideas that are referenced in the tweet. So again, alt text is extremely important because there are some folks who cannot visually access that image for multiple reasons. Here's another quick tip. When we're using hashtags, use Pascal case. So basically, I'm saying to capitalize the first letter of each word. One, it's just easier to read, but two, it's helpful for people who are screen reader users or who are using different types of assistive technologies, simply because it will then be able to parse out each word in a hashtag, versus if they come across a hashtag that's in all lowercase letters, it's going to read every single letter instead of word by word. So for hashtags, a screen reader can distinguish between the words if we have capitalized each one. So that's a quick tip for hashtags. Sometimes we use images as links. And this is just an example. I think in most cases, when you're on a web page, we know that somewhere in the top left-hand corner is usually an image of, the organization or the company in the top left-hand corner. And generally speaking, that typically takes us to the home page. So in instances where we're using images as a link, then the alt text needs to describe the image. Usually it's just like in this instance, I'm just sharing with you the words that were on the image and then telling me where that link's going to take me. So the alt text for this image that's actually being used functionally as a link, I would put North Carolina Department of Public Instruction home. So again, if we're using an image as a link, we need to make sure that we're telling what's happening when they access that, when they click on that image, what's going to happen. The next strategy is color contrast. And if you're following along on the demo document, you'll see that I have a section for color contrast where I've written this sentence in this kind of bright green color. There are some editor tools that we use that have accessibility checkers built right in that will do things like check the color contrast for you. But I wanted to highlight just a couple of external resources that can help you with color contrast. I don't imagine that every time you get that you're designing some sort of digital content that you're going to head to these websites and check your colors. Again, fortunately, there are some resources, some accessibility checkers that are built right into the platforms we're using that will enable you to check your colors right here on the page. And towards the end of our session, I'll share with you a couple of those examples. But I do want to mention that if you are, for example, creating a template for a web page or for a document or a presentation template, that you take a second and go check your colors to make sure that they're meeting that minimum requirement before you share it with everyone to use. So, excuse me. So in these two examples, the WebAIM color checker as well as this Adobe color checker, it's going to allow you to input your two colors and then see if it meets the minimum color contrast ratio. Excuse me just a second, I'm gonna take a drink. And Heather, I just saw your question. Excuse me. Um, Friends, we're going to hold on for color contrast just a minute and let's answer a question before we move too far past our alt text. In your examples with a lot of content and text on the graphic, if the content text is near on the same web page as the graphic, are you saying the alt text could be event details on web page or event details nearby? Yes, because essentially what you're doing is writing a long description for that image. So you would still need alt text. The example that I had given of the graphic here, you would still need alt text, but something like the full event information or full text from the image nearby or following the image or on the same page, something to let folks know where they're going to find that long description will be sufficient. Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Sorry, I just saw it. All right, so let's jump back into color contrast. Now, for the minimum color contrast ratio, we want it to be at least 4.5 to 1. So in this instance, this kind of dark turquoise color and this hot pink, that does not pass for regular size text. It does pass for larger text or for some like graphical components like an icon, or maybe I'm using those for a bar chart or something, because the minimum color contrast isn't as stringent. It only needs to be 3 to 1 for this larger text. What I love about tools like the Adobe Color Checker is that it gives me some suggestions that are kind of in alignment with the color scheme I was going for. And so it's giving me suggestions that have a higher contrast ratio. So you can see that basically it looks like it kept the same pink, but turned that dark turquoise into an almost black color, and now I've met the minimum. So I love tools like the Adobe Color because it gives me some suggestions. The other example that I give is this WebAIM link where I can, again, put in my colors and it's going to let me know if it's passing the WCAG standards. Our requirement is that it passes AA. The AAA standard is a bit more stringent, so it's even noting whether or not it passes that. And in this color contrast checker, I can actually use this eyedropper tool. Instead of having to look up what my hex code is, I can just hover over the color of my text like I'm doing just right here on the same page. The background is white, and you can see that that absolutely meets at least the minimum contrast. So those are just a couple of external tools to help you with color contrast. It's also important that we not rely on color alone to convey meaning. So similarly, I was talking about like with text formatting, don't rely on formatting alone. We want to make sure that people who cannot access these colors because of some sort of color blindness, that they're still able to understand the meaning of the data. So if your data chart is pretty simple in its design, only has maybe a few bars or a few pieces of the circle pie graph, then maybe adding a texture would be one way that you could not rely on color alone. Now, if you have a lot of pieces of data, then that could be visually overwhelming to add a lot of texture. So another tip is just to make sure that your data bars in this example have the labels with them. So like if this was, Alexander County, 90%, then have the labels appear with the pieces of your graph, of your chart, so that folks can understand without having to rely on the color legend. They understand what that data is representing. And the example that I have here on the left was just demonstrating DPI's colors and what those look like in this colorblind simulator, to give you an idea of how that might impact how someone is, visually analyzing the data that you're sharing. If you look at the Adobe Color Contrast Checker, there's actually a drop down where you can select your tools for colorblind safe. And so it's just defaulting to some random colors here, but you could go in here and input your colors and it will simulate what that's going to look like for 3 different types of color blindness. And that's what I did in this chart here, was take DPI's colors and then show you what that looked like through that simulator. So here's an example of times when just one example of times where we need to be cognizant of the color selections that we're making, like in our school calendar documents. So again, be cognizant of those colors, making sure that there's sufficient color contrast. In this instance, you can see there's text that also describes what those dates are, rather than someone just having to rely on understanding the color and using the color legend. It's also important to recognize that some people are going to print this, and so we need to consider what is this going to look like in grayscale with the color choices that I've selected. And this is just linking directly to that colorblind safe tool, just another screenshot example. And there's a screenshot example of that same calendar in grayscale to give you an idea of, especially if I'm referencing just a legend that has those colors, that might be difficult when I'm transitioning that into like printed grayscale. All right, the next tip is using the heading structure. And this is one of those that I definitely call a curb cut effect, a universal design feature for accessibility, because it can be helpful for everyone. So let me demo that in this Google Doc. You'll notice that I created something that looks like a heading. It's big and bold and a different color font, and so it appears to be a heading. But what's not happening in the background is that it's not being coded correctly as an H1 for heading 1. So I need to use the formatting options that are available to me so that I can ensure that if someone is using a keyboard or screen reader or some other type of assistive technology, that they recognize and where a section begins and where it ends, and really the outline structure of the document, and be able to jump from one section to the other quickly. So I need to use the embedded formatting options that are available to me. So I've changed this to a heading 1. I'll change this to a heading 2. If I really wanted, that heading 1 to be green, then I can do that. And I can go into my heading options and say, update this heading to match. And so now you'll notice that the heading 1 is that green. So one of the things that I have done is gone to options and saved my default styles once I have them set up the way I want to. It helps me remember to use headings, and so the next time I open a Google Doc, it will automatically be set to the DPI colors that I had selected and that I had set these to be. Again, it helps me remember, and I don't have to reset those every time. But this is a big win for everyone, because now notice when I open the document outline, as I'm changing the text formatting of these to be headings, it's automatically building me a bookmarked outline. So I change this to a heading 2. You see it's throwing it over here into the outline, and now these are clickable bookmarks. Another helpful tip is that when I use that heading structure, now I can very quickly go into Insert, scroll all the way down to Table of Contents, and with one click I can add a table of contents, and these are all bookmarked to the appropriate headings. So the different sections of the document. So again, helpful for everyone. So use the semantic structure options that are available to you right there in your editor instead of just making things look like headings. Another tip is just to use simple table structure. That last task again, yes. Amanda has asked for me to do that last task again. So when I want to insert a table of contents, in the Google Doc, I can go to Insert and scroll all the way down to Table of Contents. And there's actually 3 options for how I want it to look. They all function very similarly. 2 of them actually give you also the page number, and this one just gives me hyperlinks that are underlined. Again, all of them will be bookmarked no matter which of those 3 options you select, and it will take you to that section of the page. So as I continue to add additional headings, I can come up here and very quickly refresh my table of contents, and you can see it's continuing to add. So it's again based off of that heading structure. All right, so thinking about, let's see, Heather, using just headers, can you hyperlink to a certain section heading without creating a table of contents? Absolutely, Heather. Yes, you can absolutely manually create your table of contents if that's helpful. One of the things that's available, like here in this Google Doc, is that I can go into more options. And so let's say I want to take out my heading 1, and maybe I had, you know, another level of heading 3s, and I want to take those out as well. There is the functionality to be able to do that, which may be helpful if that's maybe one of the things that's causing you to think about you want to develop your own table of contents. You do have some functionality to adjust, you know, which headings are being shown in the table of contents, but you certainly could create your own and link to those bookmarks. All right, so for simple table structure, it's important that we try to use tables just for data. Now, sometimes I know that's not possible, and we use tables for things like layout. So we're trying to help design a document or a web page, and so we're using tables to help us lay out that content so that I can have, a picture over here and some text over here, and I can have 4 columns. Fortunately, a lot of our website tools, we don't have to worry about that because the layout is kind of drag and drop. So I'm looking at the DPI website, and I know when I'm building a web page like this, I can pull, I can add chunks and like a text box or an image. And I have some functionality on how I want that to be laid out on the page. But if we are using a table for layout, it's important for us to ensure that the reading order is appropriate. So in other words, I need to make sure that that the content is in the order I want it to be in. So if someone were using something like a keyboard to access content, that the order makes sense. Now we're not diving in, since we only have an hour today, we're not diving into how to make content keyboard accessible, but I'll give you an example. If I'm on DPI's webpage and I just use the tab button on this webpage, notice that I can see where I am on the page as I tab through. I'm moving my mouse with my arrow to kind of point out where I am, but I'm just using the tab key. And you'll see that it's highlighting each section as I go to let me know where I am on the page. Very similarly with a table, we need to make sure that our content is in the order we want it to be in, so that if someone is tabbing through with their keyboard, that the order makes sense. But beyond that, our table structure, especially for like tables that have data, need to be as simple as we can make them. So in the demo document, you'll notice I have this very simple table down here that's showing absences by grade level. I need to denote that this top row is a header row. And in a Google Doc, I can just click that pin. And what happens is that, for example, a screen reader user, it's going to announce to them before it tells them that there's 4 absences in 3rd grade, it's going to remind them that they're in the Monday column. So it's basically going to make sure that it's announcing how that content is mapped. It's going to let them know that Monday, 3rd grade, there were 4 absences. Same thing in the Word document. My table is across 2 pages here, so I'm just going to move it down a little so you can see. In a table within a Word document, I need to, in my table settings, I need to make sure that I'm calling that row a header row and that I'm calling the first column as a header column. Again, with the intent that if someone's using a screen reader, it's going to say Monday, 3rd, 4, Tuesday, 3rd, 0, when they're on those respective cells. So, trying to avoid nesting tables within, one table within another, merging and splitting cells, you can see how that could make that content inaccessible for someone. So when possible, keep a simple table structure, making sure that you're noting if there's a header. Certainly for layout tables, we're probably not going to have a header because we're just using that table to help us lay out information. Another thing to consider is just the mobile view. So if I am using a table just for layout purposes, if someone needs to zoom in to see the text in that layout table, then they're probably going to end up having to scroll left to right to see the whole thing. Fortunately, a lot of our website tools, and I'm referencing DPI's website again, when I zoom in, so this is how it looks now. This section has 2 columns, but when I zoom in, let me scroll back down to that section. When I zoom in, you'll see it formatted it now into 1 column so that I'm not having to scroll left to right when I zoomed in. It's reflowing the content for me. And honestly, most of our website tools that most of our PSUs are using, excuse me, probably have that same functionality where it's going to be responsive to the zoom. So it's going to reflow that content. But if I have a table that I'm using for layout, that's probably not going to be the case. So someone's still going to have to scroll left to right. So just be cognizant when we're using tables, what that might look like for users if they're using a mobile device or if they're having to zoom in. All right, the next tip is creating descriptive links. And I'll be honest, until I knew better, I didn't realize that I was making some of my links inaccessible. So instead of, and on my demo document, I have another example of this. Instead of having click here and that be the hyperlink to your, to your whatever link you're adding, instead of doing that, we want to make sure that we have enough words linked that they could stand alone. So in this example, how to create links that work out of context. The linked text that I've hyperlinked here could stand alone, and I think you'd realize that this link is probably going to take me to a web page that tells me how to create links that work out of context. And it does actually. It's going to take you to this bookmark section of this web page that talks about how to make links more descriptive instead of saying click here or learn more. Make sure that each link is unique and can stand on its own. And I'll give you an example of why this is important. One, it's just more informational. I can very quickly scan a document and see what the links are without having to read information around it. I still have just through this example link that I have here, I have a pretty clear understanding of what that link is taking me to. Click here is not informative. But another reason is because someone who's using a keyboard, for example, can tab through all the links in a document or a web page or an email. And if they all read click here, they're not going to be able to distinguish among them, and they're certainly not going to be able to understand what those links are going to take them to. So when we can, avoid click here, read more info, and instead make sure we're linking enough words for context so that all of our links, in an email or on a web page, have their own unique linked text and that it could stand alone. Another good tip is just to use judgment when you're linking full URLs. So let me go back to my demo document here. I would not want to put the link to this Google Doc in here because one, it's just difficult, it's a lot of text. But two, this hyperlink, if it was being read by a screen reader, would read every single character aloud. So, use judgment when posting full URLs. If I wanted to put the full URL for DPI's webpage, that might be okay because it's short and sweet and probably easy to remember. And so maybe I want people to be able to, quickly remember that. And it's, again, a short link. So even if a screen reader read every character, it's not going to be extremely lengthy. So you just use judgment when you're linking a full URL. The next tip is just kind of around the understanding part of the POUR framework. And that's to be clear and consistent in the way we lay out information, in the way we're communicating information, and that we use plain language. And there are lots of tools to help us with that. Honestly, I'll go to an AI tool like ChatGPT and paste some text in there and say, write this in plain language, or change this narrative into bullet points, to help it be more, easy to digest, easy to clear and easy to read. So the Hemingway editor is just another tool that will help you with something like that. You can paste in text and it will highlight if you have complex sentences, or it will even give you some suggestions for some word changes just to make it more easily readable. So just be cognizant of when we're sharing communications to make sure that we're using plain language and that we're being clear and consistent in how that information is laid out. And so this is just an example of an email, for example. There's some email platforms that will even enable you to add headings within your emails, but certainly be cognizant. As you can see here, I'm using hyperlinks that are descriptive instead of click here, click here. And I've also just structured the content to be, again, easily digestible, easy to read. And the link that I have on this particular slide points you directly to how to make Outlook email accessible. All right, so for videos, obviously we're not going to dig too deep into videos today, and it's not something that you can practice in your demo document, but I did want to mention that with videos, it's important that we're captioning our videos. There are a couple options for doing that. Depending on how you make your video, you might have closed captions, which I think we're all familiar with. If I go to YouTube, I can toggle the captions on and off, and oh, sorry, I didn't mean to click. I can even control how they look. So as a user, I can make the text bigger, I can change the text color. Some of our video creation tools allow us to bake the captions right in. So their captions are like part of the video. You can't turn them off. It's just part of the published video. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, except that generally speaking, with most of our media players, like YouTube, for example, a user has control over their captions, whether they have them on or off and what they look like. So that's kind of a pro for going with closed captions. And while there are some great AI tools that are helping with creating captions automatically, it's important that we review those because they're oftentimes not going to include punctuation. It's not going to pick up speech accurately if, Donna Murray's not speaking clearly and articulating well and speaking slowly enough. So it's just important that we're editing our captions to make sure that they are accurate. If we're doing a live presentation, I just wanted to point out that there's functionality within tools like PowerPoint and in Google that will enable you to turn on live captioning. It's really, honestly, it's really live subtitles because live captioning would also like announce in the captions would tell you who's speaking and if there's any background noise or any noise that's part of the video, any sounds. But it's a nice feature. So I'm thinking like if you're having live presentations for a school board meeting, if you're using Google, you can actually toggle those live subtitles, those live captions, and even change the size of them and even whether or not it's at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. The link that I have on here will even walk you through how to do that same feature in PowerPoint. So again, I'll share the link to the slide deck in a moment so that you have all of these links as a takeaway. And of course, I'll follow up in an email to all PIOs with those links as well. Now there are, as I mentioned way back when, there are a few accessibility checkers that are sometimes just part of the platforms we're using. So I know there's some website tools that have an accessibility checker built right in. Canvas, our learning management system that a lot of our districts use, it has an accessibility checker built in. Microsoft Word does as well. So I'll demo that in my copy of the Word document here. So I didn't mean to click that. If I go to Review and click on Check Accessibility, you'll see that it's going to pull up a pane that shows me some of the errors and warnings for accessibility. So the warning is telling me that there's some hard to read text contrast. It's also telling me I'm missing some alt text. If it would have told me too that I'm missing a table header, but I've already fixed that. So that's why it's not telling me that that's an error. Google Doc does not have a native accessibility checker. There is a tool called Grackle Docs that has a free version that has limited functionality. Of course, the paid version has all the features, but the free version will at least point out to you that you have some accessibility errors. It's not going to help you find them and it's not going to help you fix them, but it at least lets you know that you have, for example, some picture that's missing alt text. So I have the paid version, so I'm just going to demo kind of what that looks like. So I go to Extensions, Grackle Docs, and I launch Grackle Docs. And it's opening a pane over here that's going to, once it finishes processing, it's going to highlight any accessibility issues. And again, with the paid version, it will even help me locate it and even actually let me put the alt text right here. So it kind of helps me identify errors and fix them. So again, the accessibility checks are great, but it's important to note that they don't always catch everything. There's some things that are going to require a human review, like alt text, for example. It might know that you've put alt text in there, but it may not be effective alt text. So the accessibility checkers are a good first lens. And I apologize. I know we're right at the hour already. I've only got a minute or so left, but I certainly understand if you need to jump off the call. I will share the recording after the fact. So just to give you an idea with those demo documents, this is what the Microsoft Word checker found versus what the Grackle Docs checker found. So I'm not saying that one checker is better than another, but they are finding a different amount of accessibility issues for this particular demo document that I shared. So again, the checkers are a good first lens or a first check. and it's going to probably find those big things, those main accessibility issues, like things we've talked about today. But it's important that we're also doing that manual review. And so to wrap up, the short of it is progress over perfection. It's, we're not going to be able to make everything accessible overnight, but we can start working on it and we can start putting some of these strategies into practice. We didn't cover all the strategies today, but we did cover a lot of those accessibility big wins. So my challenge to you is to start. If you send a lot of emails that say click here, then start trying to make more descriptive links. If you send a lot of communications with images, then start with adding alt text to some of those. I have some additional resources that are linked here, including a link to my digital accessibility website that has lots of information about the rule and how to create and procure digital content that's accessible. And I do have a community of practice that if you're interested in joining, we'd love to have you. We just meet once a month currently to just learn together how to become more accessible in our digital content. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to jump back to the main slide and put that link in the chat. And then looks like I have another question as well. So if you need to jump off, thank you for joining. Otherwise, please feel free to stay on and ask any follow-up questions you have. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start addressing those. Let's see. I thought I had, oh, here we go. Okay, Amanda, do you have to turn alt text on somewhere in order for these to catch them? Do you mean to have the accessibility checkers catch them? No, if that's what you're asking. If I'm misinterpreting, please let me know. But if you've added alt text, it's most of the accessibility checkers, that's one of the things it checks. Even in tools like Canva, I'm going to do some follow-up webinars specifically around Canva accessibility. They have improved their accessibility, and one of the things that they've done is added an onboard accessibility checker. So this is just a sample document, and I can go to File, Accessibility, check, excuse me, check Design Accessibility. And it will look at three things. It really just looks currently at the size of your text to make sure it's not too small. It will check text for color contrast issues, and it will check to make sure if you have any images that you have alt text. So a lot of the accessibility checkers will check that. You don't have to, make it known that you've got images with alt text. It will automatically check that. All right, let's see. Next question. Excuse me. Expand my chat screen here. When using the shorter descriptions like more info or what's new or even a catchy phrase, etc., I felt that it would leave the viewer in suspense. I love that. I felt like when putting more information in the link, they may not visit the content. I guess my thinking was that it would get the viewer to the page. Is this the wrong way of thinking? I absolutely understand what you're saying there. It's it's drawing them in, right? When I use some sort of catchy phrase like that, because it's going to pique their interest and kind of drive them to click that link. And while I completely understand that, I think one of the things that we've got to try to focus on is elevating the lens of accessibility as the priority. So descriptive links that are, that are obviously more accessible because they're descriptive, certainly may not bring that allure to them that's going to draw people in to click them, quite like a catchy phrase that's going to pique their interest. But again, as we're prioritizing accessibility, I try to keep that as my main focus, right? It may not be as fancy as I want it to be, but I'm ensuring that everybody has access to it. So and I understand, Amanda, you're bringing certainly an innocent lens to that conversation, and I appreciate the purpose behind it. Um, I'll tell you another thing kind of similarly that I continue to battle with sometimes. I am an amateur graphic designer at best. And I love a good, aesthetically beautiful, graphically designed digital content. And sometimes that can be difficult to do when you're trying to make content accessible. So I'm not saying that it can't be done. You can have visually appealing, well graphically designed content and it still be accessible. But it sometimes does take some extra effort or a different view in order to make that work. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, I can make it as pretty and as aesthetically pleasing visually as possible. But if it's not accessible to everyone, then it doesn't matter how beautiful it is. So, part of that is still a work in progress for me as well. I love using Canva. I love using Adobe Illustrator, but I'm trying to be mindful of the fact that I want the content to be accessible to all stakeholders. So that's my first goal. And then I try to layer in what I can to make that content still as aesthetically pleasing and as visually pleasing as possible. Okay, let's see. When adding multiple photos about an event on social media like Facebook, does each picture have to have its own caption or does an overall caption on the post suffice? So if we're talking specifically about alt text, each image would need to have its own alt text because each image would stand alone. So that's the short answer for that. Each one would need to have its own. There is one thing that I meant to add in the slide deck, and I will go back and do that. Let's see. I'm trying to think of, I know this is silly. I'm trying to remember what session I did yesterday. I just did a session yesterday and included a slide about oh, I know what it was. It was for a community of practice meeting. I know that's silly. I should remember the presentation that I gave yesterday, but I've done so many, I forget from day to day which ones I've done. So I did a session yesterday that was just about alt text because there's so many different pieces to alt text, so many different types of images. I might have a GIF or I might have some sort of academic image, like a chart or think about an organizational chart or a flow chart or a map or a piece of artwork. So I go deeper into different types of images. And in that session yesterday, I added this slide. So while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and copy that slide over into my PIO document. And give me just a second. I'm going to put it with the alt text section. Okay. So I have updated the slide deck. Sorry, I think my voice turned off at 10 o'clock. So now in the in the alt text section, I've added this slide. I've actually created a GPT in ChatGPT where I have fed it a lot of knowledge around effective alt text so that you could upload an image and ask it to write alt text for you. Now, of course, I wouldn't count on it being exactly right, but you could even explain what the context is and ask this tool to help you write effective alt text. So I've used my own tool that I've created for some images, especially when I have images that are really complex or have a lot of text in them, so that I don't have to like retype it. I can just throw it in here and say, write some effective alt text for this, and it'll pull out all that text for me and write a good description for me. Sometimes it's better than others, but again, I have fed it some knowledge on effective alt text so that it will hopefully, provide some good alt text for you. So I've added that link in the slide deck. So when you access the slide deck now, you should be able to see the link to that chat box. Okay. Oh, thank you, Heather, for understanding. Seriously, from one day to the next, it's like I've moved on. My brain has moved on to the next day. Yes, Beth, can you share again how we register for your monthly update group? Yes, so I'm also in the process of, hang on, I'm trying to get to that slide. I'm also in the process of, what am I trying to say? Of creating a digital accessibility newsletter to go out. So my goal is to include, okay, I don't know why I can't get back to that last slide. Where is my slide? What happened to it? Hang on, I know where the link is. What am I trying to say? I have a digital accessibility newsletter that I'm hoping to go out soon. I'm going to try to make it a bi-weekly newsletter, and I'm going to include all of the PIO list, excuse me, in GovDelivery. Y'all, when I say that my voice, everything quit, I think at 10 o'clock this morning. I'm going to include in GovDelivery the PIO group for that newsletter. So hopefully that'll start coming out in the next week or so. All right, there is the Google form if you're interested in signing up for our community of practice. Okay. I'll hang out on the call in case there's any other questions or anything I can help with. I know that was a quick session on all things digital accessibility, but hopefully a good introduction to some quick strategies that you could start implementing today in your communications. Thanks everyone for joining.